at the day's headlines. Umbrella, check. Rain jacket, check. Arriving slightly later than usual, monsoon rains are making their annual appearance in South Korea. Torrential showers will start battering the country, starting from down south in Jeju. Moon-Abe summit is a no-go, despite Seoul's best efforts for a leaders' summit on the sidelines of the upcoming G20 Summit in Osaka. Tokyo says it isn't the right time as the two countries remain at odds over historical issues. Plus, the leaders of the US and Iran ramp up the rhetoric as tensions reach boiling point between the old enemies. Tehran channels its inner Trump to ridicule the US president for his new sanctions on the country's supreme leader. So, monsoon season has arrived here in South Korea, coming later than usual. Torrential rain is forecast for the southern resort island of Jeju on this Wednesday. The heavy rain is then going to spread across the nation over the coming hours, so have your rain gear at the ready if you're watching us in Korea. Our Kim Hyo-sun starts us off.
The heat advisory issued for Seoul and other inland regions on Tuesday will not last long, as this summer's monsoon season begins Wednesday. Bringing rain to Jeju first, the monsoonal front is moving in a northerly direction. It's expected to drop heavy rain on Korea's central region beginning Wednesday evening. Forecasters say this year's monsoon season is starting a week later than usual. It's also the first time in 12 years for the monsoon to hit Jeju, the southern coast, and the central region on the same day.
With the monsoonal front traveling north, it arrives in Jeju early Wednesday, the southern coast shortly after, and the central region by the evening. The downpours will end on Thursday night, beginning from the western coast.
The monsoon front is expected to dump torrential rain of more than 20 millimeters per hour on some regions. The Korea Meteorological Administration says heavy rain of up to 80 millimeters is expected for Jeju, the southern coast, and near Chirisan Mountain. 10 to 40 millimeters is forecast for Seoul and other regions. Another monsoonal front is forecast to arrive this weekend, bringing heavy showers to parts of Korea's southern coast. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Now, President Moon Jae-in is set for talks with the visiting Saudi Crown Prince in Seoul as the two sides look to bolster their economic relations. The Blue House says President Moon and Mohammed bin Salman, who's joined in Seoul by some 300 Saudi business leaders, are aiming to boost ties in construction, infrastructure, as well as ICT and future industries. Also on their agenda, finding ways to promote peace on the Korean Peninsula. The Crown Prince is Saudi Arabia's key decision maker on state affairs on behalf of his elderly father, King Salman. A welcoming ceremony at Seoul's top office starts within the hour. This marks the first trip to South Korea by an heir to the Saudi throne in 21 years. After spending 2 days in Seoul, MBS will head to Japan to attend the G20 Summit in Osaka. And with the G20 Summit in Japan now just a few days away, we are beginning to learn more details of the leaders' schedules at the multilateral gathering. President Moon Jae-in had been seeking one-on-one talks with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in Osaka, as Seoul viewed it as an opportunity to settle their dispute over Japan's forced wartime labor of Koreans. With the breakdown of talks, a breakthrough in strained Seoul-Tokyo relations seems highly unlikely, at least for the time being. Park Hee-jun with more.
President Moon Jae-in's packed schedule for the G20 summit in Osaka has an unwanted gap, a gap that was supposed to be filled by a meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. According to a senior Blue House official, South Korea proposed holding bilateral talks but heard nothing back from Japan. Bilateral relations have deteriorated sharply since Seoul's Supreme Court ordered Japanese companies last year to compensate Korean victims of forced labor during Japan's colonial rule. Japan has repeatedly called for an arbitration panel involving a third party, to which South Korea is yet to respond. South Korea has also recently proposed settling the wartime labor dispute for a joint fund between companies from both countries to compensate the Korean victims. But this was also rejected by Japan. Observers have speculated that this is a reason Abe has decided not to arrange the talks. But this leader-to-leader meeting was seen as the best chance the two sides had to narrow their differences on the issue.
With diplomacy moving with the Blue House at the center and with all authority given to President Moon, the president needs to be the one solving this issue. We can't say that the top-down approach is the best way, but this situation can no longer be resolved at the working level. The leaders have to meet and solve it.
Observers say that the government could seek to hold a summit after Japan's upper house election on July 21st. This is out of the belief that Prime Minister Abe is unable to be flexible ahead of the election when it comes to the sensitive political issue of South Korea-Japan relations. But the senior official also says the possibility of a one-on-one in Osaka cannot be ruled out completely. If Japan requests to meet on the spot, the official says that the top office will accept. But seeing that sufficient time and preparations are needed for the meeting to provide a tangible answer to the strained South Korea-Japan relations, the anticipated breakthrough could be unlikely even if an informal meeting does take place. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
It is being billed as the main event of the G20 Summit in Osaka, and you'd be hard-pressed to argue that it isn't. A super high-stakes sit-down between US President Donald Trump and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping will happen in Japan on Saturday. It should come as little surprise that their prolonged and increasingly bitter trade spat will be front and center of discussions as the world eagerly anticipates the results. Lee Min-sun reports.
Ahead of the scheduled summit between the U.S. and China at the G20 Summit in Japan this week, a high-ranking U.S. official has revealed the goal is to resume trade talks that have been stalled since May. According to Reuters, the U.S. thinks the Osaka meeting is a prime opportunity to get trade talks with China back on track. Chinese Foreign Ministry also said Beijing and Washington's trade negotiators have talked over the phone and the two sides are working closely under their leaders' instructions. This comes after it was confirmed Tuesday that U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping will hold their summit on Saturday. High-level trade talks in Washington in mid-May ended without agreement, and there have been no follow-up negotiations since then. Instead, Washington increased its 10% tariffs to 25% on $250 billion of Chinese goods imported to the United States. In retaliation, China imposed its own 25% tariffs on $60 billion of U.S. goods. Even if the two leaders agreed to resume trade talks, the main concern is whether the U.S. will impose additional tariffs on $325 billion worth of Chinese goods, as President Trump has repeatedly threatened to do. The U.S. official emphasized that Washington will not accept any conditions on tariffs, but said they might agree not to impose additional tariffs as a show of goodwill. Lee Min-sun, Arirang News.
Now, US President Donald Trump says he's ready for Iran after threatening Tuesday to obliterate parts of the Islamic Republic if it attacked, quote, anything American. Watchers say the latest remarks from both sides have renewed the possibility of a conflict amid Washington's recent sanctions on Iran's supreme leader and his officials. Lee-Seung Jae with more.
More bitter rhetoric between the United States and Iran as tensions threaten to boil over. President Trump took to Twitter on Tuesday, saying any attack by Iran on anything American will be met with great and overwhelming force, warning that in some areas, overwhelming will mean obliteration. President Trump's latest comments come as Iranian President Hassan Rouhani dismissed the new U.S. sanctions on Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, calling the White House mentally retarded, an insult the Middle Eastern nation has used in the past about Trump. In a speech broadcast live on state TV on Tuesday, Rouhani says sanctions against Iran's supreme leader would fail because he has no assets abroad, adding the U.S. measures are a sign of desperation. Meanwhile, when asked if the two sides would hold talks to end their spat, President Trump said he's ready anytime Iran is ready.
When they're ready, they'll let us know. Very simple. Ready to negotiate, you mean? Ready to do whatever. Doesn't make any difference. Whatever they want to do, I'm ready. Okay?
Earlier this week, Trump cited his efforts with North Korea, saying Iran has the potential to be a great economic nation if it abandons its nuclear ambitions. However, according to the U.S. president, the Iranian leadership needs to change first.
It's too bad this is happening. They're living badly right now. Their country's not doing well economically at all. That can be changed very quickly, very easily. But they have to get rid of the hostility from the leadership. The leadership, I hope they stay. I hope they do a great job. But they should talk to us decently. We're all for them. We want it to be done properly.
Tensions have soared over the past several days after Iran downed a U.S. drone last week, and President Trump called off a retaliatory airstrike with minutes to spare. The strike would have been the first U.S. attack on the Islamic Republic in 4 decades of mutual hostility. Experts say such an action would rapidly escalate into a wider conflict that could engulf the Middle East. 이승재, Arirang News.
Now, U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell has reinforced the possibility of cutting interest rates, but stressed the Fed will not respond immediately to temporary changes. Speaking in New York on Tuesday, he explained that appropriate measures will be taken to maintain the expansion while the Fed closely monitors current economic developments. His remarks mirror those he made in early June when he hinted at a possible rate cut going forward. Powell also stressed the Fed's independence and said he will not bend to short-term political interests. The World Food Programme says it needs an extra $20 million to maintain its food support to North Korea through the month of November. The WFP says it secured less than $30 million of funding until May, just over half its total requirement for 2019. The money is used for food, shipping and other expenditures. According to its latest report, the WFP helped around 610,000 North Koreans last month. However, international sanctions had the unintended consequence of delaying aid deliveries. The World Food Programme says 40% of North Korea's population suffers from food shortages. Now, gold prices are rallying here in South Korea as more investors snap up the precious metal amid growing economic uncertainties. The price of gold stood at a record high of nearly $46 per gram as of Tuesday, a 1.3% jump from the previous day. Gold is up 14.7% since the turn of the year. According to Korea Exchange, gold prices have been hitting new records for 4 straight trading days since last Thursday. Global delivery firm FedEx has a special delivery for the US government, but it's not the kind you look forward to. Caught in the crossfire in the conflict between the US and Huawei, FedEx is suing the US Commerce Department over export rules that are being enforced against it. For more on this and other news from around the world, let's turn to our Hong Yu. So tell us more about what is driving FedEx to do this.
This lawsuit announced by FedEx on Monday comes after a dispute over diverted shipments that prevented a Huawei package from being delivered to the U.S. and mistakenly returned to China. FedEx claims changes to export rules designed to keep tech away from certain entities or people that the U.S. government considers a potential risk to U.S. national security or foreign policy interests are damaging its business. Last month, the Commerce Department added Huawei to its entity list, preventing transfers of technology to the Chinese telecoms giant without a special license. And then came China's investigation into FedEx over misdelivered Huawei packages, to which FedEx apologized on Sunday, saying it was an operational error. Early this month, FedEx said its relationship with its Chinese customers is important and it will fully cooperate with any regulatory investigations. The delivery company says the rules assume they can screen millions of packages shipped daily when it's virtually impossible. On top of that, with 1,100 entities on the list, it puts them at risk of being fined for not having the pieces delivered and for possibly violating rules by shipping goods to enlisted entities. U.S. Commerce Department said Tuesday that they haven't yet reviewed the complaint, but look forward to defending Commerce's role in protecting U.S. national security. San Francisco has become the first U.S. city to ban sales of electronic cigarettes after its Board of Supervisors voted unanimously in favor of a ban on Tuesday. The ordinance prohibits sales of any e-cigarettes that hasn't received FDA approval for manufacturing and distributing such products on city property. Currently, no e-cigarettes have FDA approval. The ban is aimed at reducing underage use of vapor products such as the electronic cigarettes, as according to federal data, the use of e-cigarettes among the teenagers surged 78% in 2018. E-cigarette companies claim the ban will drive former smokers back to regular cigarettes. Porsche has announced it will recall nearly 340,000 Cayenne and Panamera vehicles after problems with their automatic transmission were discovered. The German automaker said on Tuesday that the cars might roll when parked due to a potentially fragile part in the connection between the gear lever and transmission. Nearly 100,000 of the affected vehicles, with models dating back to 2002, are to be recalled in the United States. Around 25,000 units being recalled in Germany.
It is time now for our Life and Info segment, where we focus on information useful for your everyday life. Today, we are going to talk about the low inflation trend here in South Korea and whether local consumers are feeling the change in their everyday life. Go-Roon-hee is in the studio with us this morning. Good morning. So, Rooney, start off by explaining the overall consumer price changes here in South Korea.
Yes, Mark. So consumer price growth in South Korea has remained below 1% level for 5 consecutive months. And this is far below the nation's central bank, the Bank of Korea's target of 2%. According to Statistics Korea, consumer prices edged up 0.7% on-year last month. The agency attributed the sluggish inflation to low domestic demand and the government expanding welfare policies such as free education. A drop in the prices of petroleum goods also contributed to the change. And the trend is likely to continue, with the governor of the Bank of Korea saying consumer prices this year will increase slower than their previous forecast of 1.1%. And as for what this means for the South Korean economy, analysts say low inflation could hurt consumer spending and private investment because they'll assume that prices will remain low in the future.
So what you're saying then is the overall trend shows consumer prices on year are decreasing. But speaking for myself, whenever I go shopping for groceries, I don't really see that being reflected in my day-to-day life. So how can we explain this phenomenon if officially prices are supposed to be going down?
Yes, so although consumer price growth in Korea has remained below 1% range since January, most people say they haven't felt a trend in their everyday lives, especially at supermarkets. Prices of what consumers use and buy every day, such as fresh food and daily necessities, are actually rising, so your eyes aren't deceiving you. Data from Korea Consumer Agency, a government organization, shows that the average price of 30 frequently consumed processed food has been going up in recent months. And this includes a wide range of products, including mineral water, soju, cereal, tofu, milk, and so on. So 18 out of 30 processed food prices increased on month in May. So decided to visit a local retailer to ask consumers about the matter.
I feel like the price of everything has gone up. It's too expensive, especially the things I buy like rice, anchovies, and fruit. I only buy things that are really necessary.
The price of alcohol has risen, including soju. The cost of drinking has become quite burdensome.
So it's not just groceries, Mark. The average price of dining out, for instance in Seoul, has jumped as well, which means another financial burden for the average person. Statistics Korea provides a list of prices of popular dining out food like kimbap or samgyeopsal, and you can see that prices increased on year in April. The average price of a roll of kimbap was slightly more than $2 in April, which is an increase from last year's figure of $1.90. Kimchi jjigae with rice, another popular dish people order at restaurants, increased to almost $5.50.
Yeah, I remember when I first came to Korea over 10 years ago, and a roll of kimbap would cost around $1, maybe even a little bit less than that, and kimchi jjigae would certainly cost a lot less than $5.50 US dollars. But times are changing it. So breaking it down then, products that we eat frequently or use a lot, they're on the rise, whereas prices related to things like education and medical expenses and whatnot are actually decreasing. And this is what's bringing down the overall consumer price growth, if I'm reading you correctly there, and keeping it below 1%. What does this difference in real inflation and what people actually feel that it is mean for the South Korean economy?
Well, Mark, the South Korean government explains it's difficult to completely eliminate the differences, saying that different households have different spending habits. However, efforts to reduce the gap is needed. An expert explained why.
In a situation where consumers feel difficulties affording everyday purchases, but figures show prices aren't high, problems can occur when the government establishes economic policies. For instance, public utility charges can change depending on the consumer price index.
So beside the economic policies, this difference between actual inflation and what people feel inflation is like is actually having quite a negative effect on people's lives and the economy in general. We do hope that Korea eventually gets out of this economic rut it finds itself in, because salaries as well have remained rather stagnant as well. So this is really hurting people in the pocketbook. Rooney, thank you as always for coming in and sharing your report with us.
Thank you for having me.
Good morning. The season's monsoonal front is dropping heavy showers on Jeju and Korea's southern parts of the country, which will gradually expand to more areas as the day goes on. So the entire country will be hit by monsoon season on the same day, which is a first in 12 years. And Korea's monsoon delivers more than 30% of the country's annual rainfall, and we're forecast to get a similar amount this year. And Seoul should see rain tonight, which will linger into tomorrow afternoon. In other regions, we'll also see showers into tomorrow as well. And southern coastal regions and Jeju are forecast to see up to 100 millimeters of torrential rainfall. So a heavy rain advisory has been issued for Jeju, while Seoul continues to be hot during the day, with a heat wave advisory still being in place. Daily highs in most areas will be similar to a couple notches lower than yesterday. Seoul getting up to 32 degrees and Chuncheon topping out at 33 degrees. That's Korea for you, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's all we have for now, news and weather-wise. Stay tuned to us here on Arirang TV. And a reminder that our next newscast is coming up at noon Korea time with our very own Lee Ji-yoon. So until then, goodbye.
South Korea is home to hundreds of thousands of heroes and patriots who have rendered extraordinary service for the country, ranging from independence activists during the Japanese colonial era to those who fought in the Korean War.
It's a huge number, but I think we have to say it's just a different system. I wouldn't